Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you're joining us from around the planet. Welcome back to Creation Conversations. And yes, I am back home safe, praise the Lord. And it's been a great road trip so far. And I'm sure we're hoping to all do it again at some point in the future. So keep that much in prayer. But we'll talk about that in a bit. We're also joined, of course, with John Mackay, Diane Sam Jenkins. G'day, everybody. How are we all doing?
Hello.
Hello.
Pretty good, even down under.
That's great, great stuff. Great stuff. Well, we'll start off as we always do with a little bit of a ministry update, let people know what's been going on. And then we're going to be talking a little bit with Diane about some interesting topics of vestigial organs. We'll be doing our fossil feature of the week as well. We'll be doing an interesting little bit of not quite criticism, but sort of a question that came out of last week's topic that we did as well. And then today, our main topic that we're going to be dealing with is actually going to be a question of what are the limitations in science? And we'll explain a bit more about what we mean by that as a topic, but it really stems out of this sort of way that people today almost worship science as a god, and even Christians sometimes are guilty of falling into the same trap of viewing academic prestige as an ultimate authority. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to be dealing a little bit with the question of design and a little bit about the history of science as well. But before we do that, John, do you want to give us a bit of a ministry update from your end? Tell us what's been going on and what have you been up to?
Well, I've had a very flowerful week, a very busy week, a week that I'm sort of glad was past, but it's been really wonderful in what happened too. In fact, I brought a couple of examples just to show you. This is one of my I've got to get in the right spot here. It's a sunrise orchid. You can see the little umbrella shape. Well, let's see if I can steady this. There we are. It's really 10 different orchids all together so that it looks like even a bit of a daisy. It's rather marvelous how it works like that. And we've had lots of rain in the past 2 weeks, so our orchids have gone mad. And we trust that, particularly Diane and I, will bring you a whole show on orchids and design. You think that's a good idea, Diane?
Oh, very good idea. Yes, we've got some lovely examples that we can share with people.
We do. In fact, I've got one here that looks very, very worshipful. It's a Stanopea orchid. I'll take it out of the glass of water. I just went and picked it this morning. They have unbelievable fragrance. In fact, we had one girl that almost had to quit the office because she couldn't take the strong fragrance. It used to give her asthma and things like that. They are really incredible. They are the only orchid known that flowers upside down. You see, the flowers come from the roots. So the roots are actually up here. That's what I cut it off, and it flowers down through the roots. In fact, Diane, you and I have done a lot of photography of this. In fact, we even have a show on this, and we'll do it one time. But because you've done a fair bit of photography and even tricking with Photoshop, can you tell us what's unusual about this orchid?
Well, you've already mentioned one thing, that it flowers out of its roots, which is pretty weird. I mean, how many plants have flowers on their roots? But the interesting thing is that it's pollinated by bees, and it attracts the bees by the strong fragrance. And I can certainly attest to the strength of the fragrance. In fact, I remember many years ago we were going to film one of these because we thought we'd make a video about orchids. And so we took this plant inside overnight just so that it wouldn't get damaged overnight. But after a while, the fragrance just overwhelmed all of us and it had to go back outside. It really is very strong because out in the real world, it grows in the rainforest. So it attracts its pollinators with this very, very strong scent. But when the bees get there, they're not coming for nectar. It doesn't have any nectar. So that's another odd thing because we normally associate flowers with nectar. In fact, what it does have is fragrant oils, and that's where the fragrance comes from. And the bees come along and they collect the fragrant oils. And they have little brushes on their legs. They're well designed to absorb these fragrant oils. But But of course, the main reason the plant wants to attract the bees is so that it can pass on its pollen. And if can you hold up the flower again?
And if you'll see what's right in
Mm.
front of my face there,
Yes.
you'll see there's a overlying, this one just here comes up over the top. The bee
Yes.
has got to get the pollen that's just there, and the fragrance is up here. So
Yes,
how on earth
yes.
does a little
Mm.
bee get pollen from down there if it's got to land in here? So take it away, Diane.
Well, actually, you're holding it on its side. If you
I
hold
am.
it up yes, so that's the way it normally grows on the plant. And that long curved column holds the pollen right at the bottom, but the bee actually lands right in the middle of the flower, and it moves around and absorbs this fragrant oil. And the fragrance is just so overpowering that as it absorbs all of this fragrant oil, eventually the bee is just overpowered and it just goes sort of, and it literally falls out of the flower. But on its way down, the flower is so well shaped that if the bee just falls down, it falls past the pollen and the pollen sticks to the bee's back.
But
Now,
not just
fortunately
the
for
bees back,
bees, this
Diane.
flower normally grows up in a
Yeah.
tree and the bee wakes up before it hits the ground. Otherwise, it wouldn't. The system wouldn't work.
So
So the bees actually do recover
So
before
the bee
they.
basically the plant basically drugs the bee in order to deposit it. That's brilliant.
That's right. Yes.
And in fact, it's even more
Mm.
amazing because it grabs the bee sort of, if you can sort of personify this, and the
Mm.
pollen is actually stuck in the one place the bee can't scratch it off. It's stuck in the middle of its back, right? So you'll find that it's so well designed that when it falls, its back actually
Mm.
hits the trigger that shoots it, and then the bee flies away, waking up before it hits the ground and takes off. So we're going to do a whole program on orchids, but this last week, because of the rain, has been marvelous with just orchids coming out like crazy. And we'll be finishing off tonight with a bit of design. But Diane, just to talk about one thing you and I have been talking about, there's one personal thing that I'm going to share that you've got to comment on, and then you'll take it away from there. My wife has been very ill since Christmas. Some of you know that already. Many of you don't. She's had, well, first of all, we had a miserable Christmas, if you can think that. Our children came up from interstate to visit us. Within a day or so, one of the kids has fainted in a swimming pool, so they had to rush him off to the emergency hospital. And the other one of the girls started to cough and splutter as if she had COVID, so they rushed home to a different state before they got locked out. And you think, okay, what's happened to Christmas? And then on Christmas night, my wife is rushed off the hospital with a gallbladder problem. And I think, oh no, it's just been one of those times when if you didn't believe God was a sovereign God, you will collapse in a heap. I mean, I physically collapsed in a heap because I was just exhausted from all of this. But my poor wife is in pain, and she's had constant problems since then. They didn't take it out because they were waiting to see if the antibiotics would work, and they seem to have worked, mainly up and down and a little bit down at the moment. So she's back on a serious course of antibiotics. But Diane, it did bring up an issue that I've talked to you about. This gallbladder, some people seem to be able to live without it. Is it one of those things called a vestigial organ? Because you're pretty much our expert on vestigial organs with your background in medical biology at Canberra University. So take it away on that issue.
Yes. Well, the gallbladder hasn't been classified as a vestigial organ because we have known what it does for centuries. It actually concentrates bile, which is made in the liver, and bile is a fluid, and it consists of a whole lot of waste products. The liver is like a big biochemical factory. It processes the nutrients that you eat. And it also processes waste products that we no longer want that need to be disposed of. And they can be disposed of through the digestive system as well. And also the liver produces various substances that help us with the digestion. So it's quite a complex mixture. And the gallbladder stores the bile in between our meals, because when you need bile most is when you've eaten a meal and you need it to help with digestion. So the gallbladder sits under the liver, and the liver makes bile all the time, and it goes into the gallbladder where it is stored and it gets concentrated. And sometimes that process doesn't quite work well, and you can get gallstones, which are a source of pain from the gallbladder as well. And in fact, that's the reason it is often taken out. Now, because you can live without a gallbladder, because the connection between the liver and the digestive system is not cut off when you take out the gallbladder sort of sits off on the side. So the bile duct, which connects the liver to the digestive system, as long as that remains intact and unblocked, you've still got the bile doing its work there for you. So you can live without a gallbladder, and there are probably plenty of people out in the audience today, or who watch this video later on, who can attest to that. They've had their gallbladder taken out.
But it actually does do something. So it's not a vestigial organ by definition. I remember when I was a kid, the roads were a little bit more primitive here in Australia, and I discovered that even with our designed engineering stuff, a motor car, there were lots of things that you actually didn't need. Some were helpful, but most you could do without, except for the motor and the tyres. But we had one car and the lights went. Well, when you live in the bush, so what? You don't have lights. What we did was we sat somebody on the front bumper bar with a torch as we drove through the bush. You can do without lights as long as someone's willing to sit on the front bumper bar, which was a precarious ride, but you could actually do it. Do you have to take anything if you don't have a gallbladder, Diane?
You do have to be careful with your diet, because the having the unconcentrated bile is not as efficient. And also when you've eaten a meal, the gallbladder will contract and you get a surge of bile just when you really do need it. So people who've had their gallbladder taken out just have to be careful with their diet, and they'll find that some things, particularly a lot of fatty things, might just upset their digestion and give them a bit of discomfort. But that is better than having a gallbladder that either doesn't work at all or is completely dysfunctional because it's got stones or because it's infected.
So pray for my wife at the moment, because having a incapacitated wife, you soon discover how little you really know. Like my grandson and I have been doing the cooking and trying to figure out what can we feed this dear lady, and she's not there to tell us the answer to our question. Like, okay, we're washing this up. Where does this pot actually go? Where does it live? You find an amazing list of things that you actually have been in a house for X number of years and you don't actually know the answer to. So please pray for her. She's been in pain quite a bit, and seriously have to consider the operation as the next stage to relieve her from that pain. But we really would value that prayer. So Diane, tell us the difference between that and a vestigial organ, because vestigial organs keep coming up every now and then. When she went to the hospital, they said, have you had any operations? She said, yes, she's had her appendix out. Now that's a vestigial organ, isn't it?
Well, in fact, it was considered a vestigial organ for a very long time, and there are a whole lot of others. If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, there was an enormous long list with dozens of body structures on it that were listed as vestigial organs. Now, what they meant by a vestigial organ was an organ that used to have a function in our evolutionary forebears, but for some reason or other, we no longer need it. And so there's just a sort of few remnants and bits left there. Now, this is a good example of how science is not something that's sort of freestanding and as Joseph said, almost worshipped like a god. Science is a human activity, and therefore what we find from science is determined by what worldview we have of the world around us, what ideas we have about how the world got here. And so vestigial organs is actually a concept that comes from evolution. And so when early scientists looked at the human body and they found various bits and pieces of tissue that they didn't know what did they, because they had this evolutionary mindset, they thought, oh, these must be just vestigial remnants from our evolutionary forebears. The appendix was a classic one. However, that is not a scientific attitude. The proper scientific viewpoint or the proper scientific approach is, all right, here is something we don't understand. Now, if you have the viewpoint that God created the human body and therefore whatever bits we have must have a function, but we don't know what they are, the proper scientific approach is, all right, here's something we don't understand or we don't know what it does. We should do some more research and find out. Now, to give them some due, at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a limit in terms of the technology because some of the so-called vestigial organs included things like endocrine glands, like the pituitary gland, right? Which, if you just look at them inside the body, they just look like a lump of tissue. They don't have a duct that connects them to another part of the body. They do have a blood supply. And they secrete hormones. And hormones are like little messengers, chemical messengers that go around the body. And you don't need a lot of the chemical for it to have a big effect. So until we had good biochemical techniques that could detect really, really tiny levels of these chemicals, it was very hard to work out what these organs actually did. We could do some various physiology experiments on animals and take them out and things like that. Can't do that with people, of course, but and get an idea what the effect on the body was. And so gradually, as the technology improved, we've discovered that there are lots of useful functions. Some very important immune system structures were once put in this category. There's a little piece of tissue that you may not have heard of called the thymus. It's actually a piece of tissue that's in your chest behind your sternum, which is the breastbone, the bone in the front of your chest. And in babies, this is relatively large, but it seems to shrink during as you mature. And so again, it got put in the category, oh, well, this thing shrinks away and shrivels up. It must be a vestigial organ. But in fact, it is a source of lymphocytes, which are important immune cells. And it is very busy in the early parts of your life. So it's very, very active and very large because the immune system has to work hard in the early part of your life because it has to determine which bits of the outside world, which microbes we are going to live with in peace and which ones are going to be declared as enemies. So the lymphoid system, like your lymph nodes and various other things, really busy in the early parts of your life, and then again in adolescence when you go through a growth spurt. And the appendix turns out to be part of this system as well. If you look at the appendix of a very young person, of a small child, it's got masses of this lymphoid tissue in it because, again, it's close to the digestive system where a lot of microbes live, and you have to determine which ones we're going to live with in peace and which ones we're going to fight off as enemies. So depending on what your worldview is going to determine your attitude to science and how much you're going to invest in scientific research. And so some things have gone unresearched for a long time because they've just been written off as useless vestigial organs because people have had the wrong worldview. Whereas if you come at science from the worldview of the world is an interesting place, it's full of things which were meant to function, therefore we should do some more research and find out. So a lot of people think that creation is something that just puts the kibosh on science. In fact, no, it's not. It's a real stimulus to science. And I'm sure you found that with fossils as well as with living things as well.
Yeah. Can I just interrupt you there? All of this we have a big article on vestigial organs because we want to find out from Joseph what he's been doing, because he's had the most exciting, adventurous week of all of us. I won't spoil your thing, Joseph.
Yes,
I believe you've got quite a few things to share. But if they want to get this document of all the appendix and all the vestigial organs and the information on the evidence of God's handiwork ruined by the fall, so that my poor wife is now degenerating, but I'm degenerating too, so I can't boast too much. Where would they go to get this, Diane? And Sam, you can put it on the screen.
It's in our fact file. We have a little section there called topical articles, and you can look up vestigial organs, and there's a PDF file, a PDF document that you can download. And it looks at the whole issue of vestigial organs, not just in human beings. They are described in other animals and in birds as well. For example, ostrich wings and emu wings are considered to be vestigial. And quite a few years ago, someone wrote an article in New Scientist, and actually the journalist who wrote it had this throwaway line about ostrich wings being useless. And an ostrich farmer wrote in and said, no, they're not useless at all. They have all sorts of other functions. So there's a reference to that. But yes, it's a useful article for looking at the whole issue of vestigial organs, just in not only in humans, but also in other creatures as well, and how our understanding of science, how you're going to understand science, where you're going to invest your efforts in scientific research is determined by your worldview. That's why it's important to understand the history of science and the limitations of science, as well as all the interesting things we're finding out in science today.
Okay, Joseph, tell us what you've been up to.
Well, yeah, that's exactly one of the reasons why I wanted to deal with this topic today. And it was sort of a bit last minute, throwing all of the ideas together and getting all the people together, which was mainly due to me arriving home fairly late last night. Quite a lot of you who follow us at Creation Research will know where I've been. I had a wonderful road trip down to the Isle of Wight. That was a picture that I took on the ferry on the way over. We had wonderful weather for it all. Up north in the UK, there were gale force winds and all sorts of havoc, and people being without electricity for days. And we didn't get any of that down south. We had beautiful weather, lovely still calm sea of the Solent there that crosses between the mainland and the Isle of Wight. Great fossils that we found, like this giant fossil tree there from a big sort of flood log dump down on the Isle of Wight, and dinosaur footprints and all sorts of things. There's actually over 2 hours worth of footage now available up online on our YouTube account. They include live videos, they include the end of day recap videos, and they also include the shorts as well that we did. We did a few YouTube shorts, which seem to have gone down really popular. So we're going to hopefully do some more of those and show John and the team how to do them over in Australia as well. So you can now catch up on Indiana Joe's road trip and all the wonderful stuff that we did on there. We'll show you some of the fossils that we collected from the road trip for our fossil feature in just a moment. But really what we're looking for now is some feedback from you, from the people who are watching it. We've had quite a lot of good feedback so far, but what we want to know is, do you want to see something like this again? As I travel around, whether it be for ministry or whether it be for research or whatever, would you enjoy being able to see where I'm going and see what I'm doing, as well as some of the science and the research and the history, and maybe even bringing John Mackay on it and so on and so forth? And the second question off the back of that is, if you do want to see that again, are you willing to support us so that we can do that? Because one thing that I found during this trip is it was great fun to do, and we went down there for a purpose, which was to do some fossil hunting and to collect some fossils and to do some research, as well as a number of other things. And we thought we'd kind of add on this, let's film this road trip as we go. And so it was great fun doing it. It wasn't helped by the fact that we had technology crashes, and the technology is still playing up, so please support us if you can. But one thing that I realized is that it was busy enough doing all the normal ministry and research and stuff. To try and add an extra thing onto it just meant I had no time in the slightest for anything admin wise, all the normal stuff that you'd have to do, answering emails and so on and so forth. So what it basically meant was for the week, I had to ignore all administration work and all office work and everything that I'd normally do as I travel around. And John, you've sort of taught me the ropes of ministry, and you know that you get bogged down a lot with all of this admin stuff as you travel. So what it means off of the back of that is that if we were to do it again, I would need to make sure that I cleared my diary, so to speak, so that I wasn't bogged down by any of this office work, or that I made sure that that work was covered. And of course, to do that, you need somebody else to help you to do that. You need to get caught up to do that. You need to make sure you have certain things in place, and all of this does cost. So we'd love to do more of these again. And John, I'll ask you for your opinion on it in a second, as a sort of a first time that we've tried this kind of thing. But if we are to do more, we would need some support, as we need support for all of the work that we do. So I hope you all enjoyed it. I had great fun doing it. Let us know if you'd like to see it more. Let us know if you can help and support us. But John, what did you think of the whole idea?
Well, number one, I love it. And number two, I'm looking forward to learning how to do shorts. I don't mean the Aussie shorts we wear around, but I mean the things that you are doing, because even these things here, if I do something on the little sunrise orchid, wherever it's got to, there it is, then you could do that in 30 seconds and share some of the exciting things and put some close-up pictures in it. But we are very aware, after being very patient with you, Joseph Hubbard, that you had lots of crashes last week, not vehicular crashes, that your technology was pathetic.
I know.
In just redoing those. So for those of you who love Joe on the road, I'd encourage you can support through your whatever they call the donations through this program. So do that now. But some good news, we are now up to £10,000 roughly for a new motor vehicle. And Joe, that was a borrowed vehicle, wasn't it? Or a
Absolutely, yeah. That was a borrowed vehicle. It was actually my mother-in-law's vehicle. She's been the whole family that I've been staying with, my wife's family, ever since we got married, or before we got married, actually. And they've been a huge support to the ministry, and I really would not have survived, and neither would have the UK ministry survived without them. So a huge thank you to Sandra. It's basically her vehicle. It was purchased for her dad before he passed away, because the ramp comes down the back and you can roll a wheelchair in the back of it, right? And when it was sort of made redundant, when he moved into a care home, it was kept hold of, and I've been given the privilege of being able to use it. So it's about as, it's a lot more practical than just a normal car, because you do have more space in the back. But for big ministry trips and for traveling and staying over, we really do need a better vehicle. So there's lots and lots of different ways that you can support us, whether it's vehicle, technology, supporting me and my wife financially so we can do these things and travel and do this research, as well as, just supporting us in prayer and everything else as well. So there's lots of different ways to do that, and every country has its own creation research office. And I think it's important to note, John, that wherever you donate to, whether it's to the Australian site, whether it's to the UK site, whether it's to the USA site, it all comes to support the ministry as a whole.
It certainly does. So, Steve, to answer your question, Steve's been a good friend of the ministry for a long time. And, of course, we can't escape from down under to come and minister to you directly in the USA yet. Well, we probably can if we can sneak out. We just can't get back home again due to all the stringent regulations over here. But, yes, if you would donate to the USA Trust, and it is tax deductible there, it does help the ministry as a whole, and we'd encourage you to do that, or to do it via the super chat on the program now. That's not tax deductible, but it certainly helps the ministry. And you can do that to the Australian office, or you can do it via PayPal as well, which is a very efficient way to get money all around the globe. But if you're going to do that way, there is one little trick we've learned. You have to designate it as a gift or a donation, right? If you don't do that, then PayPal rightly takes out a percentage as a tax. Right, so make sure if you put that through PayPal, you put it as a gift or a donation. You don't have to tell them it's to this ministry or whatever. They will gather that, but it's certainly not a tax payable payment of any sort. So yes, Joe, let's go for it. And are you going to show us anything? I mean, you've just held up a rock and we hardly saw it at all. I know you've got better ones there, so tell us what else you think about.
We're going to show you some of the wonderful fossils that we found, which we've kind of incorporated into our fossil feature. Some of these that we found on the trip, which was great, and one particular one, which I'm going to show in just a moment, was actually one that I got from a good friend of mine down on the Isle of Wight, Jim, or Jurassic Jim as he goes by the name of. He runs a wonderful fossil shop, and it's great because I'm good friends with him, so he gives me good deals, right? So I get to go down there and dig through some of his stuff, so we get fossils that we can sell on. We get fossils that we can put into our museum collection, and we've got a fabulous great big fossil, which we'll hopefully show you in a future episode. But let's start by talking about some of the ones that I found on my trip. Now, this is one of the first ones that I found, and it doesn't look like much more than just a rusty old rock, which is really what it is. But you can see that little part there. Let's move it in front of my face or closer so it gets into focus like that. I need to get a secondary. There we go. No, not quite. So this little top bit here is how I found it, and this bit down the bottom here is all the natural rock. So you have to break it up until you find a rather wonderful ichthyosaur vertebrae. Now this needs a lot more clearing up, so we'll get some special little tools on it and clean it up nicely until that looks better. But then have a look at this one that I found, which the sea has already done all the work out for. It's completely washed it out, so you can see a nice wonderful little disarticulated vertebrae bit. Very nice. Vertebrae off of an ichthyosaur. Ichthyosaur is what is commonly referred to as a swimming dragon or swimming dinosaur. They were known as sea dragons all the way from when they were first discovered until really the middle 1900s. In fact, if you go to the Natural History Museum, you can see some of the Hawkins collection. Thomas Hawkins was a collector of these fossils. Mary Anning, a very famous fossil collector, found the first ever ichthyosaur and continued to dig out ichthyosaurs out of the cliffs at Lyme Regis and Charmouth, which is where this is from. And she ended up actually selling a lot of her fossils to people like Richard Owen and Thomas Hawkins. Now, Thomas Hawkins wrote a book in the mid-1800s called Hawkins' Book of Sea Dragons, Book of Great Sea Dragons. In fact, if you go and see Hawkins' collection in the Natural History Museum, you'll actually say painted on in big black ink on all of these fossils, sea dragon. Because you find out the word dinosaur wasn't invented until the 1840s by Sir Richard Owen, who basically considered it to be a scientific word, right? Just like you and I don't go walking around saying, oh, look, there's a Paxilius involutus in the fridge. You say, oh, you know, there's a mushroom there, right? Or whatever. He considered Dinosauria to be the technical name, the Latin name. He referred to them commonly as dragons, as did all of his colleagues and all of his peers at the time. They referred to them as dragons. To them, dragons and dinosaurs were one of the same, including these sea dragons. And we've got one other last fossil that we found. It is an absolutely stunning example of a completely articulated ichthyosaur vertebrae section. So you've actually got, if we look at it like this, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll see where the other one joined on at the end. And you've even got, if I hold it up to the right way, there it is, a nice little bit of rib that has actually coming off of it. So a really, really fabulous fossil there. Absolutely stunning, one of the best that I've ever found. And John, have you got anything like this in your collection?
No. Terrible to have to admit, but we found some lovely ichthyosaur stuff in the rocks in New Zealand, and that, of course, and that we have the same rules as you do, that if it's actually in the cliff, you need a permit to sort of take it out. If it's fallen down like yours is, you can take it home with you. So yes, we found them, but no, we don't have them in our collection. So we eat our heart out, Joseph, and look forward to you coming back and bringing a good example.
Absolutely, yeah, it's looking great. And we're going to talk about one more fossil feature before I have a rather exciting announcement to make. And then, John, I'll be handing back to you for our little question that we got off of last week's topic. Right, let's have a look at this here. Let's see how well we can get the camera to actually focus here if I put it right in front of it. There we go. That looks pretty good to me.
No, that's good. Yes.
Lovely. Can you see what it is? we've got in the middle here this strange round thing, and then all of these little spiny bits on the outside of it. It's actually a sea urchin, but it's been partially broken up, but it's still in pretty good condition. I mean, can you see all of the spines that are all around it? It's absolutely
Joseph, we
stunning.
can't see anything down here in Australia. You're just oh, there we are. That's better.
Is that better? Yep. Can you see? Is that better?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Now, John, these sea urchins here, what do they tell us about how this was buried?
Okay, well, if you have a sea urchin that's total, if everything is there, then even if it fell apart by being squashed after the mud has covered it, because they are very fragile, we have them living off the coast. And in fact, some people love to pick them up, crack them open and go and eat the snot that's inside them. That's my only description. I can't think of any other way to describe the intestines of a sea urchin. But it means that if all the bits are in the same place, it wasn't sort of died, fall to the bottom, fell apart, and washed around by the ocean currents. So if you got it in that state, it's a well-preserved, soon rapidly buried at death.
Absolutely, yeah. This was one of the first things that I was sort of taught when starting to study geology. It's how do you recognize whether something has been living, died and been buried after it sort of died and sunk to the bottom, or whether something has been transported into place by currents, or whether something was buried very, very quickly. And this shows all the hallmarks of it being buried very quickly under fairly turbulent conditions, because it's broken a lot of the stems off, but it's been buried so quickly it hasn't had time to spread them around, it hasn't had time to lose any, it hasn't even really had time to actually crush anything up and destroy it. So it's a beautiful, beautiful example. This one was actually from the private collection of Jim himself, which we've been able to acquire. So it's a lovely addition to our museums project. All right, I've got one last thing to talk about, and then Sam, why don't we do a quick thank you for all of the super chats that's come in?
Yes, most certainly.
And then we'll hand over to John. All right, you too can now come and find. Well, we can't guarantee you that you'll find anything quite as spectacular as this, but we can certainly guarantee that you will find a fossil. One of the things that we like to do is try and make sure all of the locations that we do field trips to are a place where anybody, no matter what their experience, is able to find a fossil. Now, we hold lots of field trips around the UK all throughout the year, and very, very shortly we'll be having a full list of fossil hunting locations, including one particular place we're going to be doing in sort of May time is up in Northumberland, which is a little bit out of the way, but it's well worth the trip because you'll actually get to come up and see a rather spectacular polystrate fossil tree. Now, that will be absolutely marvelous to actually come and see. We're also doing a rather special, first ever for a long while here with Creation Research. It's the first one that I've been sort of in charge of organising. But John, well, I'll ask you to comment in a moment about the one that you did a little while back on the Isle of Wight. What we're actually going to be doing is doing a week-long 5 nights down on the Jurassic Coast. We've got a beautiful campsite with a completely separate rally field, which is where we're going to be holding it all. We're going to have a big marquee. We're going to have seminars. We're going to have teaching. But most importantly, you get to come and spend the week looking for fossils with us. It's going to be down on the beautiful Jurassic Coast. We're right down the road from Lyme Regis and Charmouth. We'll be able to spread out into places like the Isle of Portland, which if you watch my road trip video, you'll see has got some fabulous fossils there. We'll be able to go a little bit further afield to places like Lulworth Cove. But really, it's going to be a week long of going and looking for fossils, having workshops that teach you about the fossils and teach you how to look after them and how you can use those fossils for evangelism. It'll also be evening seminars where we're going to try and get some different speakers including John Mackay and Diane Eager. If they can't be here in person, we'll definitely have them live stream in live so you can ask questions. We're going to have different speakers as well, which we're going to try and come in and have evening seminars. We'll start in the morning with devotions and prayer and a time of worship. It's going to be a really, really wonderful event for 5 nights, 6 whole days, which will be absolutely amazing to actually get really hands-on with the fossils, as well as be able to participate in some great fellowship and some great seminars and teachings as well. Now, that's coming up, and we've even got firm dates for it. It'll be starting on Monday, the 26th of September. It'll go through to the 1st of October. So that's the Monday through to the Saturday. A great time, and tickets will be available very, very shortly with all the details and everything. So make sure you come to that if you can. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity. But John, many, many years back, you did something a little bit similar to the Isle of Wight. How did that go down?
Well, it went very well because I was actually really in England. And unlike now, where if you do something in the evening and invite me to speak, it's 3 a.m. over here, Joseph Hubbard. So schedule our times properly there. And it went really well. We could have had 2 or 3 things in a row. We started off very similar and did the surveys of the beaches to go with the tides, and then had a Bible study. And we recorded the Bible study on Genesis geology, so people can actually pick that up if they like, and they can even find more of the same sort of stuff we did in our book, Walking with Jesus Through Genesis. So it went really well. I'd encourage you, come along, bring the whole family. It's suitable for little kids and suitable for big kids and suitable for even bigger kids, right? So bring the whole lot. You will really enjoy it. It's worth the expense, and it's cheaper than eating every day at McDonald's, as well as sort of going to the movies and all the stuff you can waste your time doing. Come and feast on God's word and enjoy God's world at the same time. Good, healthy exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. It's all coming together really, really nicely. So look out for tickets. We'll be doing that very shortly. It's going to be a wonderful time to do. And who knows, if it goes down really well, we might try and do it as a sort of a bi-yearly event, a 2-yearly event, so we can move around a bit. Maybe we can go down to the Isle of Wight. Maybe we can go up to the Yorkshire Jurassic Coast or down to South Wales. And there's so much potential for it. So get behind it and support it if you can. Come along to it. It should be a really, really fantastic week-long trip. And, certainly the first that I'm going to be involved in, but other than John, when you did one last time and however many years ago that was, I don't think there's been anything like that before or since, really. So a unique, very unique opportunity. And it does what we want, what we're about. It's what creation research is about. It's getting out, getting hands-on, showing you the evidence, the real evidence, teaching you how you can actually go out anywhere, do research, come back, learn about what you've seen, learn about what you've done, and actually apply it to your life. So it should be a really, really fantastic event to do there. All right, Sam, let's run through and do and do some thank yous from people who've
yes,
donated
most
so
certainly.
far.
We have been showered with blessings. My goodness
Wonderful.
me. We have a donation from Neil Grindley, super chat for £10. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neil.
And Jim P has donated and said pair character punching the air with a fist and bump written on his knuckles. So
lovely.
Well, I'm sure that's in God's word somewhere. Not quite sure where to find it, but there we go. There we go. We've got $3.99 from Reed Fine Living. God bless you. Thank you so much. Our good friend George Bond as well.
I need that coffee. Thank you.
Sent 20 Aussie buckaroos. Said cheers. Thank you so much. Who else have we got? T Clem has sent $50. Thank you, brothers and sisters. No, thank you so much. God bless you. Very, very. This is fantastic. Thank you so much, guys, for blessing the ministry in this way.
Wonderful stuff.
Without these donations, we couldn't function as creation research. So you help things happen, like the upcoming festival, and supporting a new shed for Jurassic Ark or whatever, that's all coming from you,
and the Genesis project, which is also coming up as well at some point.
It is still coming. It's still coming. We haven't forgotten about it.
We've got some really, really good ideas for it and some really great ways that it can be enhanced and turned into a big feature. So bear with us. It should be really, really good as we move forward with that project. So
100%.
great stuff.
I think it's just more of a case of we just want to make the project right, and we don't want to release it unfinished or not to the standard it should be. So I think it'll come out. It'll definitely come out this year. I think we can safely say it's going to come out this year. But watch this space.
Great stuff. All right, John, do you want to do your bit and then we'll have a break for some questions? Because you've got an interesting little comment that's come out of our topic last week. If people remember, last week we dealt with the word J. So we did Jurassic and we did J for Jehovah and J for James and all that kind of stuff. So, John, tell me what came out of that discussion.
Okay, well, there's obvious questions that come in on our chat line. I can see them coming down here, so I know who's asking things. But there are other ways that people ask questions too that we get that Sam doesn't see. So we have people who send me emails. We have people who phone up and say, I heard you say this. So, and most of those are Aussies who are actually up early on a Saturday morning and they think you're one of them. Aussies like George Bond, right? Thanks for your donation, mate. We really do appreciate it. And what you'll find is we don't mind which way you send your questions, but it's obvious that our issue on the King James Bible has really attracted a lot of interest there. So I'm going to swap over to the PowerPoint. So if you'll go through with me, I'll hover over the thing again, click on that, and there we're up. Okay, notice I've got KIV with a question mark. All right, there's the question. Can you really prove that KJV did not use J? My pastor wouldn't be very happy reading the KIV, probably because he doesn't like the NIV. But it's interesting question. What about words? Because Jesus said, you'll be judged by the words out of your own mouth. So words really matter because we're made in the image of the word and sin ruins our words. Okay, do you know the origin of that first statement up there, arose by any other? Well, it's an Australian origin, arose by any other name. Now, then I've got a question. How do you pronounce IAMES? See, arose by any other name smells the same, a good Australian sentiment. But IAMES is not an Australian name. Where does it come from? Let's help you. When we say EAMS, we end up with I, and then we have a little Y after it. I mean, come on, try and say it. EAMS. Did you just say Y, or did you say a little I before it? So you end up with actually pronouncing the I as a Y, which most people hear. So you could have the King James version. But if you try and say James, one reason I know this and love it is that we had two guys who were professional linguists. They both were university lecturers, and I loved to sit down and listen to them actually teaching us how words and letters actually worked. James, the only way you can say it is if you spell it YHAMES. Or was that YH? How do you pronounce that funny little house with a chimney on the top we call H or H? Okay, but if you go the YH one, then you end up with Hames. All right, now this is interesting because Hames is actually King James' original Gaelic name. But in Scotland, it would be Hamish. Now, how on earth do you go from James to James to Hames to Hamish? And it's interesting to hear what happens to our ears as well as our mouths. You know, you can often appear wise by keeping your mouth shut and just listening. It's a very good piece of advice. Okay, Ham became Hamish. There's a question. How do you pronounce Asia? I mean, we're concentrating on the S at the end of Hames that's turned into Gaelic Hamish. Okay, have you noticed that when you say Asia, you actually pronounce it A-S-H-I-A? We do, Asia. Therefore, Hames or James, now Hamish, and what's happened is the S has actually turned into S-H. How could earth could all this be going on at the same time? Now, we have real problems with British people who come to Australia and we talk to them and they know historically our language came from their language. But many of them have no idea what we're saying because we've changed the vowels, we've changed the consonants, we make the thing sound a whole lot different. Okay, pronounce S-U-R-E. Have you got it? Sure, correct? Where was the H? You see, sure is because the French invaded England by the Normans. Now, they weren't really French, they were Norsemen. You know, Joseph's relatives up there in the north, the Vikings. Sure comes from the Old French S-E-U-R, which was pronounced as our ears hear it, S-Y-U-R-E, which became in English, sure. Okay, or Irish, take your pick. All right, now we now know how Haim and Hamish got the end up with an SH. But here's the real problem. The French are Gallic people. Those of you who love Asterix, the comic, they emphasize the Gauls. But the trouble is, Gauls is another way of saying Celts. And the French and the Scots are both Gallic. But the English, them rotten English, as us Scotsmen would say, they're Anglo-Saxon. They're sort of Germanic by origin. Whereas us French and us Scots are actually related. It shows up in politics a whole lot. So if the French suggest it, the English will reject it, and therefore the Scots will go for it. There's no doubt about it. If you want to sort out Scottish politics, then think French and act accordingly. It's really true. A rose by any other name smells the same. So you'd best read your KIV, because it used to be, how can I prove that? Notice I've spelt your wrong too, Y-O-V-R. Perhaps you better check out some of these things. Here's the first edition KIV in 1611. To the Most High and Mighty Prince, who's that? This is from the foreword, Prince James, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France and Ireland. Okay, there it is. How do you pronounce that? Is it James? There was no J then, no J in the Bible in 1611. We can prove this because there's the spelling put into ordinary text for you. Out of the book of James, chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. James, a Syrian. Oh, there's a U. We would put a V today. And the Lord Jesus Christ. Is it Jesus? Jesus? Jesu? How would you say these? My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into How do you pronounce D-I-U-E-R-S? It's interesting to see some of the changes that have occurred to our mouths and our ears and the way we hear and say something. There we are. To the Most High and Mighty Prince James, by the grace of God, the translators of the Bible, with grace, mercy and peace through, who is I-E-S-V-S. Isn't it interesting? Now, when people criticize, because you've heard them, the skeptics say there's 30,000 changes between 1611 and 1795. Well, it's true, but it's got nothing to do with accuracy. It's got to do with how our ears heard things, how our lips said them, and asking, where did these changes come from? Okay, I-E-S-U-S. You would say grace, mercy, and peace through Jesus. Well, in 1611, Jesus was I-E-S-V-S. Excuse me, Professor Hall, where does all this stuff come from? Well, it's interesting to note. You see, you can't know about the future unless you actually explore the past. And I've told you time and time again, if you want to know about tomorrow, revisit the past and visit it often. I-E-S-V-S, no doubt about it. The J is now what the I used to be, and the U is now what the V used to be. How on earth would this sort of thing happen? Okay, there's a question. It's going to turn into a question. The U/V evidence is still with us. Think carefully. I mean, when you go to school, you learn A like an apple, A says A. B like a bat and ball, B says ba. When you get to U, what does U say? Does it say A, as in but, or U as in, well, is U ever pronounced U? How does V pronounce? Because can you pronounce that letter there? Sure you can. You'd pronounce it as U, a double U. Now, when you go to Europe, I still remember my first lecture series in the Budapest Medical University, where someone told me, here's how you spell the word, because I couldn't understand what they were saying. And they said, double V, I double L. Double V? I thought, I've never heard of it. Oh, yes, I have. He's talking about will. So we now pronounce that double U. Interesting. There's the rule in the mid-1500s. You didn't need it before that because printing wasn't around. They all wrote with all sorts of different spellings. So they're making up rules about these letters they're borrowing from other languages to make up what you and I call English. V at the start of the word was pronounced V, but inside the word, it was pronounced as U. Now, did they teach you that at school? Because if they taught the skeptics, you shoot them down straight away. They don't know what they're talking about. How do you pronounce Jesus' name? Pretty much the same now as you pronounce it then, if you know what the rules of the language are. So when you have a look, here's a test for you. Here's two words. The first one was invented in the 15th century. So it's coming up at the same time as King James is. Were the translators unscrupulous? But how did you pronounce the first U? I've spelled it with modern text, right? How would you pronounce the first U if the first U used to be a V and the middle one, the U is pronounced? Well, how would you actually say that word in the 1500s? Aren't you glad umbrellas didn't exist till the 1700s? Because would you like to go around with an umbrella? How would you even say umbrella? It's hard in English. So when you have a look, here's the advice that I'm going to give you, because I love the King James Bible. I came to Christ through the King James Bible. I even tolerated all the what befores and whither begot nots, and I plowed through it knowing that the Spirit of God, I didn't know those words in that day, but something was drawing me to read. Search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me. But don't forget the context. This is Jesus speaking to his Jewish enemies, the people who prided themselves on knowing what the word of God said. And he's really having a shot at them. You know the Bible better than you know the back of your hand. Search the scriptures. You think you have eternal life just because you are bold in reading it. That may certainly testify of me, but look at the problem. I know many people who will defend this version or that version to the hilt. They'll stab you with it. But Jesus said, why won't you come to me? It's in me you have eternal life. Can I give you a principle of reading your Bible from cover to cover? Worship the person, not the print. Get to know Jesus better day by day. And then you will understand what his word is, because his word is living in you through his Holy Spirit. Well, if you've got questions coming up, you can even ask us more about this sort of thing, because it's fascinating stuff beyond a shadow of a doubt, and it helps a lot of people overcome problems in some of the language sometimes. So send them into the office. Joseph, we're going to take me off screen now, so you'll have to remind me what we do. We hover on our text bar there, and
you just press the Windows key and click on the browser. That's all you have to do.
Yeah,
I've taken you off the screen this way.
Very
That's
good.
Great. All right. I think we should have a brief break and do some questions. If any questions have come through, Sam, if you want to start pulling some of those up.
Certainly.
We'll go through what we've spoken about so far and some of the questions that we've done. And then I think we should after that probably move on to the main topic of this evening, which is talking about the limitations of science and what's been going on with that. So questions.
Well, we've had another donation as well from
wonderful
from
Bless
Keith Keith Colvin, super chat, $10. You guys are terrific. No, you're terrific. You're terrific. You're fantastic. Thank you so much. God bless you so much. Right, I did see a question from Georgie Bond. Let's have a look here. It's an interesting question. I've wondered this myself as well. Question: do you think there was a fire-breathing dragon with similar mechanisms to the bombardier beetle?
All right. Well, I've probably been asked this question more than anybody on the screen at the moment, because I've been here longer than anybody on the screen. No need for any comments, guys. It's very interesting that when we have a look at bombardier beetles, because we do have them in Australia, right? And my first experience, I picked one up and all of a sudden it went bang. And then there was a ouch. because there was a burnt spot on my sensitive center of my palm. It actually hurt, and it went brown really, really quickly. Now, we all know Dr. Gish, Professor Gish, was famous for his talks about the bombardier beetle, and Ken Ham and I in the early days traveled around Australia with him, right? And we got to realise, of course, that he only had one set of jokes, and he told them at every meeting, and it was in a different town, which probably saved his life. But you'll find he knew an awful lot about chemistry and about design and about bombardier beetles, and we've discovered even more since his passing. So when you have a look at the actual bombardier beetle, and the story goes, it's got two tubes in the back, two bags to prepare stuff, and they're squirted out, and then they mix together, and an enzyme is added, and the enzyme causes the reaction that is so quick and so violent, you get a massive release of energy, a massive amount of noise. Well, a massive compared to the beetle, right? With me, I just went ouch and went thump. That was my automatic reaction. So it didn't do the beetle much good at all. I honestly suspect that the original use of that fiery emission, not that it's a bright spark or anything, it's certainly a powerful noise generator, it's certainly a powerful heat generator, and it's even blown in the face of spiders who are attacking the bombardier beetle, and it turns them away. It keeps the bombardier beetle safe. But I suspect that since there's no evidence bombardier beetles used to be bigger, a tiny little beetle like this, even in a perfect world, is hiding in the grass unintentionally. You're another bombardier beetle, you're looking for a mate, you need to find one. You don't go out in the day because all them big dinosaurs can stomp you, and so therefore you go out at night. But at night time, somebody needs to find you so they can mate. No better way than going bang, bang, bang. I'm here, it's me. Sarah, I'm here. That's from Joseph Bombardier Beetle.
Thanks. Yeah, I gathered that. Yeah.
What you
That's
find
not
is
how I summon my wife. I'll just have to say that.
What you find originally is it had a good design, and the same is probably true for the dragons and the stories we have both from so-called mythology of fire breathing. And in fact, it's called mythology because we weren't there to record it so-called scientifically. So no wonder we're going to do the limitations of science in a little while. Historically, these were regarded as facts of history, right? And so they were treated as St. George fighting the dragon that would breathe out fire to protect itself. What would a fire-breathing dragon use fire for? Well, I suspect pretty much the same as the bombardier beetles, except this time you are big and you mate in the dark, so you need to light up the sky, and your girlfriend needs to say, oh, hot stuff, I want to go over there and find you. I suspect there was an attraction to it. But could they have had that mechanism? The answer is without a doubt. They could have that with no trouble at all. I don't think it would have been the same mixtures in the beetles, but in many of the reptiles and mammals, you have a equally important fire generator. Let me tell you my experience. I live out in the country, have been in the country for many, many years. And when we first bought this property, we kept sheep. Trouble was we had a wet season like this current one, and all of a sudden we had grass where there was no grass 2 weeks ago. Then we had clover that grew everywhere, and we had sheep that were hungry, so they ate fresh green grass and fresh luscious clover. You know what happened? They increased in size, they bloated, and I quickly rang the vet and said, what should I do? And he said, what you do is you get a little sharp tube, a hollow tube, and it's sharp at one end, and you go bang, right? And you punch it into where the stomach is, and all of the gas will come out. And he added one word of warning. He said, whatever you do, mate, don't be smoking your pipe while you're doing this, or you'll blow your face off, right? Because what comes out is methane. So technically, the sheep could be a methane fire generator if it liked. It won't catch fire in its mouth. It won't catch fire until it actually comes out and mixes in the air. So there's a safety mechanism built in there, no matter which end the methane comes out. And yes, there are foolish young men who've tried exuding methane. We can't do it from out, we do it from the other end, and they light it. So please don't have methane parties. You'll find it can be very painful. So what you find is there is no problem in many creatures that eat grass, because many of the dinosaurs show plenty of evidence having digested green plants, so they have a potential methane generator. And secondly, when you look at the animals, could they generate a spark? Have you ever played with an electric eel? Yes, many animals can generate electricity. Put the two together, generate electricity. Have a look at the two little tubular holes in the skulls of many dinosaurs as storage places, and you've got methane generation, you've got electrical charges, so all the potential. But do we know this for sure? Not from the science, because every dinosaur Joseph Hubbard has dug up is dead, right? That's why he's doing his sort of doctorate on sort of dealing with what's in those bones. So we've never dug it up to see it, but we have plenty of human testimonial from history as well as what's in the Bible. Joseph, you got anything to add to that?
No, I think you've covered very, very extensively. We've got a number of other questions, so let's move on with some of those. We've got time for our main topic for this evening. What else have we got coming up, Sam?
We've got something that isn't a question, but it's sort of there's a question hidden inside. This is from
That's from Marek.
That's from Marek. I really enjoyed your road trip, Joseph. Fantastic ichthyosial vertebrae, praise God. I know a place in the Jura Mountains that has lots of fantastic dino tracks open to all, would make a fantastic road trip. God bless you all.
Yes, it would.
Possible.
Yes, it would.
Watch this space.
I've never actually had the privilege of going to the Jura Mountains. I know that you have, John, and we have contacts out in Germany as well. So it's certainly very doable.
Well, the Jura goes all the way from Germany through Switzerland and down. So it's very extensive. Yeah,
it's extensive, and we've got contacts out that way. So get behind, support. We'd love to do more of these. And again, the better technology makes it a lot better to broadcast. I mean, I was doing this all from my phone, but you get a GoPro and you get a proper microphone and link it up, and it makes it a lot more efficient. With a new laptop, it works really well. So get behind and support us in this. And I'd love to keep doing them, and love to plan to do one specifically for a road trip, rather than just kind of tagging it onto the end of what I was already doing. It'd be nice to actually go and spend a bit of pre-planning as to where we can go and what we can do and what content we can bring you, and some better and more detailed content. I think that'd be a really, really great project to do. So yes, keep supporting. What else we got, Sam?
Yes, we have a question here from T. Clem. Let's put this on screen. I have a question if there is time. Oil and coal are hydrocarbons of dead plants, algae, and animals. How did most of these end up 1,000 feet underground?
All right. I'll say a couple of things to you, Joseph, since we've been running experiments on coal, and I used to lecture in coal geology. Number one, you will find that plants are certainly the dominant part of coal fields. You can dig down 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet, several thousand meters in North Alaska, and even then come up with green leaves out of the surface of the coal plant. So they obviously were buried really very fresh there and covered up before even the bacteria could chew on them. One reason most of the fossils associated with coal are beautifully preserved is because of the same reason the plants are green. The bacteria didn't even have time to degenerate them. Okay, in running experiments, we've discovered that you can make coal by taking plant material and using clay as a catalyst, and you can generate carbon-rich materials in a very, very short period of time. We do it at Jurassic Ark. So if you go to creationresearch.net, you can put up our site on the screen, Sam, creationresearch.net, and look at research, right? Look at the research button, and you find links to coal articles. You can go to Q&A. You can go to the fact file, heaps and heaps and heaps of stuff on coal. How could you end up so far under the ground? You see, most of us have the idea that the sediments were laid down slowly. Now, if there's one thing I've had to abandon, it's that concept. And we touched on that last time with our strata machine experiments. I've sent Joseph a new PDF on the next stage of the strata machine experiments. But the one thing it's teaching us is that not only do the fossils, not only do the polystrate trees, not only do the multiple laminations with no breaks in them, with fishes and turtles and all sorts of creatures crossing multiple layers, tell us the whole fossil record was laid down far faster than any of the standard textbooks say. You get to the point of saying, well, is there any break in the 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters of sediment above the coal seam that tells you it got there slowly? And inevitably the answer is no. It got there all quickly, which is only really explicable if you say, how would Noah's flood produce coal? And the answer is rip the forests up from all over the place, sort them out, dump them, bury them, and then continue to function. And the whole thing was designed to destroy the world. As 2 Peter chapter 3 says, God's purpose was to actually destroy the world. And that's why creation research is so adamant this same Jesus is coming back again as a judge, and he's already prepared a way for you to be saved, as he did for Noah. So don't avoid it. He can destroy planet Earth no matter how much money the greenies or the presidents try to put in to preserving it. Joseph?
Yeah, I'm going to comment off the back of that because a couple of years ago now, we were having a discussion online, sort of over a group chat, and somebody came up and said, well, this is the very reason why we know that oil and coal can't be hydrocarbons of dead plants, algae, and animals, because how did they get down there? You know, there's no way for them to get down there. And they claimed that oil was abiotic in origin. They claimed that it was just something that God had created. It was not part of a fossil fuel. They claimed that it could produce naturally out of rocks. And their main argument basically came off the back of some very bad science and some very misunderstood science. And the biggest argument was mostly, well, my husband is an expert and that's what he says, so he must be right. Anyway, what I was asked during the course of this was, would you be willing to provide the numbers that you use to determine the fossils or the animals they reflect were the creating force for oil? He said, remember, this equation will need to reflect the currently known and already used oil produced over the last 140 years. I would be really interested in seeing how many dinosaurs had to give their life in such a short period of time for this to have occurred. Now, obviously, there's a couple of false statements in there and a couple of fallacies, but I thought it'd just be interesting just to run through some of the calculations I ended up doing, because I went and spent a good few hours working this out and kind of working out, well, all right, using some very reasonable assumptions, could this possibly, could the plant matter and the animal matter from the time before the flood actually have produced the oil that we have around us now? And so here's a few things from my notes. All right, first, no actual scientist, creationist or not, believes that all oil is made up of dinosaurs. That's actually a myth which is sort of pushed out by a lot of the media. And while it's possible that animals can be condensed into oil, as John mentioned earlier, it's certainly plant matter that seems to be the predominant factor in creating this oil, right? You can produce oil within a relatively short amount of time. Right, numbers. An estimated 135 billion barrels of oil have been excavated so far. So what we're going to do is we're going to double that number so we can add on an estimate to the amount of oil still remaining. Bear in mind that the big greenies are running around saying we're going to be running out of oil, we're going to run out of oil in the next 30 years. Doubling that amount of oil would mean that we have at least another 300 years worth of oil extraction, right? So we're well overestimating it compared to what a lot of the climate change and the anti-fossil fuel proponents say today, right? So we're working on a total figure of 270 billion barrels of oil produced by the flood. How much organic material is needed for this oil production? Well, you can see we'll get references have shown that experiments have shown that 600 kilograms of organic matter can produce 1 barrel of oil. So there's currently an estimated 45 billion tons of plankton alive today. This figure could easily be quadrupled for a pre-flood world where the atmosphere, water, and climate was consistently warm. But for these purposes, we'll just double the figure. So we have 90 billion tons of foraminifera material, so planktonic material. For plants, an estimated 300 million tons of plant material is grown every single day. Again, this number could be quadrupled in a pre-flood world when there were no deserts, no ice plains, nothing like that. But again, we're only going to double it. 600 million tons produced a day. There are approximately 1,400 years between creation and the flood, meaning that 305,760,000,000 tons of plant material had the potential to grow. So if we half the figure, because some of that obviously has to go towards coal, and if you're still following by this point, we're left with 90 billion tons of plankton and 152.8 trillion tons of plant material, which makes a total of 153 trillion tons of organic matter. So how many barrels of oil could that produce? Nearly 200 trillion barrels of oil, which is nowhere near close to the figure of oil from past and estimated future. So you can easily produce the amount of plant oil material that we're dealing with from the plant material that was growing pre-flood. So there's a few little mathematical figures for your interest there.
Okay, Joseph, that sounded like the annual Treasurer's report from the British government. But thank you for the information. Diane, I'm going to ask you a question now about our experiments at Jurassic Ark. And Sam, if you can put up the link to our experiments on oil and coal. Diane, we've made oil in a very short period of time at Jurassic Ark. Do you want to tell people what we've done?
Yes, we've just taken organic matter from various sources. We have used plants. We've also used fish and prawns and put them in plastic bags with clay as to act as a catalyst. And we haven't heated them up. We haven't squashed them and used pressure or anything like that. We've just put plants, fish, prawns, various other things with clay. We've made sort of sandwiches out of them. We've encased them in plastic bags, sealed them, and we have just left them. And it certainly hasn't taken millions of years. It hasn't even taken a year. We've gone back within weeks and months, and we've started to see the changes. And in fact, you recently, only the other day, sent me a beautiful fern leaf that had gone black all around the edges. And that had been set up in a matter of weeks, I think. But I can't remember the exact date. But I have seen these. In fact, I actually helped make some of these when I've been up in the Creation Research head office and up at Jurassic Ark. So we have actually observed this change where we have taken fresh plant matter or fresh fish and other flesh type things, put them together with clay, sealed it up, left it to do its thing, and sure enough, we have got carbonization, because coal is basically just that, it's why it's black, right, full of carbon, or we've made oil, depending on what the starting materials was. So it's a rapid process if you have the right conditions, nothing to do with time.
And it also means that the claim that we are running out of materials is absolutely false. These are actually recyclables, right? Yes. And it's I would have thought that many of the greenies would have loved our experiments, but it turns out they're hating many of the experiments because it implies that, hey, there is a God, there is a creation, this is a designed planet. You don't need to say we're running downhill, therefore you need our green solution at all. You can actually recycle these things and recycle them very well. In fact, if you haven't thought about it, many, many years ago, we asked a question on where did Noah get the bitumen for his ark, right? It's one of the questions on our Q&A site or in our fact file. I can't remember which at the moment. But basically what he did was the same as what the Europeans did before we had oil wells. Now, for those of you Canadians, please don't let the Americans talk you into thinking they dug the first oil wells. Your first oil well is at Oil Springs and you beat the Americans cold. So never let the Americans boast that they had the first oil wells. But in Europe, before they had oil wells, here's what they used to do. Get the pine trees, a very common ingredient of fossil areas that give oil and coal. You get the pine trees, stack them up in a big triangular pile, cover them up with dirt or clay, set a fire at one end, and all the resin in the tree will come out the other end full of black ash and carbon, and you'll find it's sticky because it's dehydrated, it's waterproof, and you can put it on the outside of your boat, and it does exactly what Noah did with his. So you can actually invent, you can make bitumen. right? You don't need to dig it up out of oil wells. So the people who said Noah couldn't have coated his ark with pitch because there couldn't be pitch till it was oil, and away it goes, a silly circle. But it's based on the fact that you think you need millions of years to make this stuff. No, 2 afternoons work with a pile of pine trees, or a couple of weeks work with just a plastic bag, no technology, and clay and a prawn, and you'll be amazed how much oil you actually get.
I'll just quickly mention, because we do have a lot of American viewers, a prawn, by the way, is a shrimp. Contrary to popular belief, Aussies do not put shrimp on the barbie, they put prawns on the barbie, just like we have prawns here in the UK, but you refer to them as shrimp over there. So that's just a language comment there. But yeah.
Well, you have many royal prawns in England too, I believe.
We have prawn means something different here in the UK. It's completely. But yeah, there we go. All right. Do we have any other questions? In fact, no. Let's come back to questions later. Let's get on with the main topic for tonight. We'll come back and do any more questions. Keep the questions coming in, because remember, if we don't use them in this broadcast, we will use them in future broadcasts when we do our special Q&A, which will be coming up in just a couple of weeks' time. So, right. John, our topic tonight, I wanted you to deal with this. I asked you to talk about this because something that I've noticed, especially getting sort of back into academia, is there's a common trend, both with secular scientists as well as with, unfortunately, Christian scientists and creation scientists, to hold prestige, or academic prestige rather, almost as a god, particularly with science. You know, science is the ultimate goal. We can prove everything with science. There's this idea of, you know, the scientist in the white coat who's completely unbiased, who's understanding the world around him purely from his observations and the things that he's doing, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of science, which is a topic that fascinates me, and we'll chat about that as we go forward. But in particular, I wanted to be a little bit sort of philosophical tonight and talk about some of the limitations that science has, obviously tying it back into a biblical point of view, and how far can science take us, and at what point do we actually realize that, well, actually science can't take us this far at all in the slightest. So can you share a little bit about this? I know this is a program which you've done a number of times before, and it's been very useful for me and hopefully useful for everybody else as well.
Okay, interaction with Diane coming up, because she's an Aussie, I'm an Aussie. We do have royal prawns down here, which is a derogative term in Australia. And you're quite right, we don't put shrimp on the barbie at all. Lobsters maybe, certainly prawns. But Diane, we have a classic example of a science limitation. Now, we didn't prepare any of this together because a young man called Joseph Hubbard sent us the topic at 3 a.m. Would you people believe that? 3 a.m. he sent us the topic for today. So, man, what a scramble. But anyway, 40 years ago, Diane, there was the beginnings of a famous trial, a famous court case where a lady was accused of murdering her baby. Do you remember the name of that lady?
Yes, that was...
I've caught you on the spot, haven't I? Lindy?
Yeah.
Lindy?
It was Lindy Chamberlain. That's right.
Correct.
And
That's correct. And what was her defense? She said she didn't do it.
Well, she said the baby was taken by a dingo, which is a wild dog. They were a bit of background. They were out camping out near Ayers Rock or Uluru, so out in the middle of Australia, and they were out camping. So they were in a tent, and the defense was that this dingo had come into the camp and come into the tent and taken the baby. And so when they did eventually find the baby's clothes, and so she was accused of murdering the baby. And there were several trials and investigations and all sorts of things, and eventually, and she was put in jail for a while, but eventually it was found that she was telling, the evidence was that she was telling the truth, and she was released from jail.
Let me stop you there and go back and fill things in, because this was one area where my father, an atheistic person who trained in a lawyer's office in Scotland, we actually agreed on this one thing. Some people ask me, how come you do so well at debates? Well, I ended up having to defend Christianity before my atheistic dad right from day one, basically. So he was a good arguer, and I ended up being a fairly good arguer. But we totally agreed on the Lindy Chamberlain situation, because here's the background. Science comes into it in a very important way. She was accused of murdering her baby. Did anybody see her do this? No, no witnesses. Everybody said she was in the tent. Nobody saw her leave the tent. Nobody saw a dingo that was carrying a baby around. So the traditional sort of evidence used in a court of law, the scripture says, make sure you've got two witnesses and their story agrees. There was no human witnesses to her doing this thing. So Diane, do you remember when they called the police research group, the scientific investigators, what eventually was used to hang, draw and quarter Lindy Chamberlain? Do you remember?
It was the remnants of blood. There was a breakdown product of blood. But again, there was no connection. No one saw how that blood actually got into it was in a car, I think.
It was on the roof of the car.
Yes, on the roof of the car, yes.
Okay, so this was scientific evidence, right? The police forensic scientists said we have blood tissue left on the roof of the car. And so the courts believe that, despite the fact that in the court cases, witness after witness said, no, she didn't do it. No, we didn't see it. No, we saw no dingo. No, we saw no evidence of this. But the scientific evidence of the police forensic officer outweighed all of that. So evidence from people who weren't there outweighed the evidence of people who were. Now, the tragedy was, of course, it cost Lindy her marriage because, she went to jail for murder. Even in English law, you go to jail for murder, you can be divorced because you're a dead end, right? So her marriage broke down, sadly, under all the pressure. And she was then finally released without any sort of public forgiveness or anything like that. She was never found guilty because they found the baby's clothes related to a dingo lair years later. Okay, the point being, the scientists who weren't there had no right to an opinion about anything. They could suggest something based on their blood, but traditionally, the biblical picture is the witnesses who were there outweigh the evidences of scientists who weren't. Point number one, a limitation of science. Science is very good in the present. If you want to know what cheese tastes like, eat it. If you want to know what chemicals it's got in it, then test it in the present. Test it over and over again. Wonderful methodology. If you want to know if the moon is made of blue cheese, you had to wait until our rockets got there. Now we know it's not made of blue cheese. We've actually run a test. If you want to know what's on the other side of Saturn, then you have to get there. What's the 15th ring made of? We can guess, we can put spectroscopic analysis, we can come up with a good suggestion, but until we have witnesses on the spot, scientist works well in the present. Scientist has to be patient if it makes a prediction about the future, but the minute it starts to go backwards, you need a different methodology, the ones the courts have always used, the ones that the Bible says you need at least two witnesses who were there in the past. Now, here's the contradiction between modern scientific method and what we call, the biblical picture of creation. The Bible does not claim to be science. It claims to be truth. The scientific aspect claims to be more truth, right? You can only find real truth from science, but then you get to the end of science and they tell you science contains no truth at all. Yep, that's where you get to in the end. In scientific theory, there's no actual truth left, because it's a totally different kettle of fish. So here's the difference. The whole issue that we're talking about here and the limitation of science you need to understand is the argument is not science versus religion. That's the way it's portrayed. Science equals evolution, religion equals creation. Science, well, deal with that in your laboratories, deal with that with all the men in white coats, but religion, that's not even entitled to be in the classroom. It's not science versus religion, it's truth versus error. Can I encourage you? There is the real fight that's going on. Now, to sort of illustrate this, I'm going to ask you another couple of questions, Diane. And again, it doesn't matter if you don't know the answer, because you and I didn't have time to prepare this like we would often do. Do you remember?
Some of us sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning.
All right.
That's the truth. That's the truth. Well, you don't blame me, blame Joseph. When you actually look up science, do you know the name of a man called Occam? What was he famous for?
He's famous. Well, he's famous for the phrase Occam's razor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you think of a razor as a means of cutting things, and so he was cutting to the truth. He's saying if you want to come up with the right answer for something, you have to cut down to the minimum, simplest explanation. So Occam's razor, you get rid of all of the superfluous stuff and get down to the simplest, most straightforward explanation.
So to use Occam's razor on your lengthy answer, the simplest answer is usually right. That's really where we got to, right? And so when you look at some of the famous controversies in science, was the sun the center of the solar system, or was the earth the center of the solar system? In the end, they had no technology to sort out those two issues when it was a really provocative controversy. So here's how they decided it. Our theory that says the sun is the center and everything goes around it involves more simpler and less sophisticated mathematics than the one that has all the planets and the sun going around the earth in the middle, which became so complicated that you just sort of got lost. And you said, well, this is what the philosophers have said in ancient Greece, it must be right. So the whole world swallowed that ancient Greek mythology, as it turns out. Occam's razor, Occam was a priest. Occam believed that God told the truth. He'd revealed the truth, and he said the truth will be obvious because God's nature is stamped simply and plainly on everything in creation. So never forget, the basic rule in science has come from a priest in Christianity using a biblical principle. Okay, so going one step further, I sat down with a man who worked for, that skyrocket mob, NASA. He worked on design systems for them. And I asked him this question, listen, can you prove the Earth is the center of the solar system? Can you prove the sun is the center of the solar system? Do they either work? And he said, we can actually, because we've done it, in order to ship the space rockets out to where we want them, we've done the maths, assuming the Earth is the center. We've done the maths, assuming the sun is the center. And the funny thing is, you can get both there both ways, right? They both will work. The maths is a whole lot simpler if you just aim at the sun and point and go bang and just calculate how far the sun will move between now and the time it's going to get there. Far simpler. So again, it's still Occam's razor based on a Christian principle. Now, I'm going to bring up some PowerPoints, Joseph. So again, I press the Windows
hover
key.
over the PowerPoint slide and click it up. Yeah, I'll bring it up here.
Good, there we are. A little bit of science history, because I only wish that I'd done this at school and even at university. Here's where it first showed up when I got involved in the creation, evolution controversy. In science, everything we observe, measure to discover must be successfully tested again and again before it's accepted as valid and as factual evidence of what is real. Sounds good? It was on page 5 of the National Academy of Science publication, Science and Creationism. But where on earth would you get the idea that running a test today and running a test tomorrow and then the next week and 100 times after that and getting the same results actually means anything at all? You see, did this just come out of the blue? Did somebody think about it? Because it's very evident the ancient Greeks didn't have that belief. They were not good at physics. They were not good at chemistry. They even ignored the fossils. They said they were the tricks played by the gods. Where do you get the idea of testing things? This was a book claiming that anyone who believed in creation was a nerd. Anyone who believed in creation couldn't possibly be scientific. I did a debate in Tasmania. Dr. David Green, head of geology, was there. And he got up and he said, science recognizes no authority, no historical authority, no human authority. And of course, he was out to bombast anybody who believed in biblical authority. Okay, and read that. Science recognizes no authority, no historical authority, no human authority. Now, courtesy of my hard-learned debating skills, I immediately came back and I said, on whose authority do you say that? Oh, his whole argument fell apart because there was no answer to that. He'd just been making it up in exactly the same way as he was accusing the creationists of making up the authority of the Bible. But where do we get the idea that testing means something? Modern science definition. Here's in the Science Teacher's Journal a few years ago. Scientists refrain from considering God's actions in their work. Wow, I thought you didn't mention God in science. There it is in the definition. Instead, they use observation, experimentation, logical arguments, heuristics. Now, this was a publication for science teachers, and I'll guarantee 99% of science teachers have no idea what heuristics are. It uses healthy skepticism to produce scientific knowledge. Look at the bottom bit. Scientific theories are therefore explanations about aspects of nature without reference to God. Who says? The Science Teachers Association. On whose authority do they say that? Where do we get the idea that coming up with repeatable testability in the present is a concept that proves something without reference to God? Because the minute you say scientific theories are explanations about nature without reference to God, you have reference to God. Ah, interesting. Okay, who said this? Francis Bacon. There are two books laid before us to study to prevent us falling into error. First, the volume of the Scriptures, which reveals the will of God, then the volume of the creatures, which expresses his power. You'll see the reference? Two books of Francis Bacon on the proficiency and advance of learning, divine and human. Man, they wrote long titles in those days. London, 1605. Now, I'll be honest, that's a quote from an American book. Now, you've already mentioned, Joseph, that they have trouble with prawns on the cooker as opposed to shrimp on the barbie. So there's no doubt about it. English has, do we use the word devolved since the Americans took hold of it? Because when you check the original, you find it's far more impressive. Why pick Bacon? Yes, he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He knew more about money in the Elizabethan days than most other people did. Next, he was the code breaker in the English monarchy. He was the spy master, right? He knew about, codes. He knew about spying. And he also was the guy who invented the empirical method. Test something today, test something tomorrow, get the same results. You have proved something. Notice what he said. Two books. They guide us. One's the Scriptures. The next is the creation. No doubt about it. He was a six-day creationist who believed the Bible had authority, and his method comes from there. But look, if you check the original, man, is it more impressive. For our Saviour says, you err not, knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God, laying before us two books or volumes to study, if we'll be secured for error. First the Scriptures, revealing the will of God, then the creatures, expressing his power, wherefore the latter is a key to the former. Okay, I'll give you a Bible verse. Test everything, only keep the things that are true. Now, as Joseph Hubbard is known for saying, that's a verse that should be in every science textbook, because that's what you're doing. Test everything. It's the only way to do it, the only way to find out what's true and what's false. But then that's what our friend Bacon said. That's what our friend who came up with the razor, Occam, that's what he said. Why would you even believe that? Because if God's nature is seen in creation, as Romans chapter 1 says, that gave rise to the Protestant religion, that gave rise to Francis Bacon's ideas on the authority of Scripture, then God never changes. So if God never changes, test one today, get results X. Test one tomorrow, get results X. Do the same thing for 100 days in a row. If you always get X, it's because it reflects the constant, unchanging nature of God. You get this continuing on through the end of the 1600s. God indeed gave motion to matter, but in the beginning, he guided the various motions of parts of it as to contrive them into the world he designed. Now, we're going to finish this section on design. So, Diane, I hope you've got an example coming up, because I've got some beautiful ones coming up here that I'll talk about after you, that they should compose and establish those rules of motion. Robert Boyle, on the laws of nature. It's to do with the fact that you can repeatedly test this, as Bacon said, because God put it in the beginning. So any science teacher who believes that God has got to be left out has been fed a lie, and they are feeding students a lie. Who said this? Well, Isaac Newton is well known for being a biblical theist, right? He believed that God created and set his nature. It did not arise out of chaos. There's nothing new about evolution or Darwinism. Newton had to combat the Greeks, who got everything here by chaos. Nothing arose out of chaos or by the mere laws of nature. Even the laws were created. You can't say, take hydrogen, let it evolve according to the laws. Our friend Dawkins is a nerd saying that. The beginning once formed, they might continue by those laws for many ages. And our last example, one of my favorites, Michael Faraday. Yep, trained in a printer's office, became one of the best experimental scientists around the place. And therefore our philosophy, they're used, as we would now say, our science. Oh, I like this man. Do you realize science is an art form? It's actually a philosophy. And now that you've unhinged it from God, it's a philosophy that floats away in a vacuum. It is meaningless the way we use science today, as the science teachers say. It is limited because it can no longer believe in truth. Don't be surprised. One prediction based on that is increasingly the limitations of science will show, in that scientists will get so frustrated at not being able to reach a conclusion, they will fudge the data. Diane, you might want to take that up and tell us where we can find out more about that. Therefore, our philosophy here used, as we would now say our science, while it shows us these things, should lead us to think of him who has wrought them. Michael Faraday, you will find, for it is said by an authority far above even that which these works present, that the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. Why pick a verse out of Romans? There's one simple reason. You see, his disciple, James Clerk Maxwell, took that same verse and he used it to say God is a triunity, Father, Son, and Spirit, equal in role, equal in function, separate in role. James Clerk Maxwell used that very thought to say light reflects the nature of God, and he came up with one of the few scientific paradigms that has remained unchanged, the triunity of light. And his theorem of electromagnetic radiation actually worked, and it's based on your Bible. So any science student who believes that you can't put God into science, if you leave God out of science, you unhinge it from actual reality, and you end up with the same problem you have in Hinduism. You sit on the ground and go, thinking this is unreal, and you have to escape to reality. Look at the Cavendish laboratories. The heavens declare the glory of God. Why? Because all astronomy was really based on a biblical principle that God has stamped his nature in everything. Well, here's my finishing point. Science is another way to make students what we want them to be, to teach students how we want them to think. Can I encourage you? When Jesus said, if you're a Christian, go and teach everybody what I have told you. Go and teach them those things. Make them my disciples by teaching the things that I have told you. And he told us from verse 1 of Genesis to the last verse of the book of Revelation. If you want to make students to be atheists, teach them science is unhinged from God. I know the governments all around the Western world are determined to get God out of science. What they'll end up doing is producing non-science, otherwise known as nonsense. Well, Joseph, we're going to go back to the screen now. I hit my cursor, press on there, and then go back to there and up to there. There we are. All right, Diane, can you think of any other sort of limitation of science is worth bringing up at the present time? We've dealt with the past. Science is pretty poor on the past, which covers fossils. We've dealt with your need to be able to run tests, the simplest explanation being the best one. We've learnt the fact that you can define science as having nothing to do with God, but you are telling an abject lie. Diane, in your area, in medical science, anything come to mind that's a good illustration for people?
Well, actually, we should pick up on that last point, that science can never prove negative things. So we cannot prove there is no God. Well, how are you going to prove that? You cannot prove there is nothing. All you can say is, we haven't found evidence for it. But in fact, there is lots of evidence for design. And if you read just the general scientific literature these days, and we live in a wonderful age for evidence for design, because there's a whole burgeoning area of research now called biomimetics, where scientists are studying living things. There was a recent story that came out in the scientific news, and we will write this up a little later in our newsletter, about scientists studying owl wings so that they could design better drones and better aircraft wings, because owls have this wonderful ability to fly without making any noise. Now, if a machine makes any noise, that's a waste of energy. So that if something can operate quietly and work quietly, it's actually more efficient. And so scientists are studying the wings of owls to see if they can design a better drone or a better aircraft wing. And that's just one example of a whole multitude of things where they have looked at living things and then worked on those and say, well, can we use similar materials or similar composites of materials or similar geometry to design some sort of machine or device that will work more efficiently? Now,
okay, Diane, can I just interrupt you there at the moment? Because yes, the theme that you've mentioned is design actually is a scientific concept, but the guys who take the design are really becoming copycat designers. So designer is actually a scientific concept as well. And Joseph actually introduced a book right at the start that I think will fit in really well here as part of the history of people understanding why science tends to reject design and, more importantly, reject designer. And it's fallacy, it's false, it's something you want your pastors to know, that you can be a designer in science and God was the ultimate one. Joseph, what's that new book you've got there?
Well, this is something that I picked up in Lyme Regis. There's a wonderful old bookshop, and it is like, you know, a book lover's dream come true, because it's just room after room after room of books and old books piled from the floor to the ceiling and just everywhere. Anyway, I went digging through, having a quick look, and we came across a rather old book, which I snapped up because it was rather spectacular. It's Paley's Natural Theology Illustrated. It's a book that was published right at the end of William Paley's life. This particular one was actually a reprint in 1836, about 20 years after the first edition came out and after he had passed away. This is by the way, Charles Darwin's book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. All right, now what was going on with William Paley? Very, very quick history lesson. The Greeks had started to pull together ideas which sounded a lot like what we would currently recognize as evolution and millions of years. Ideas that things could evolve out of the slime, spontaneously generate, and given enough time, these creatures could form hopeful creatures which would be able to survive better than the other non-hopeful creatures, and so the non-hopeful creatures died off and the hopeful creatures were able to continue growing and living. Sounds very similar to the natural selection idea of Darwin, sounds very similar to the idea of evolution in general. And in fact, the Greeks flat out believed in evolution, and it was a very racist theory of evolution, because they believed not only had they crawled out of the slime, but they believed that they had crawled out of better quality slime than the Jews had. So it's a very racist, you know, exactly what we're dealing with today. All right. Skip forward and you find during the French Revolution, the revolutionaries had a bit of a problem. You see, according to the philosophy of the day, the monarchs were appointed by the king. And so if the king was appointed, by God, if the God had appointed a monarch, then you couldn't dare question him. And of course, the revolutionaries were all about getting rid of the monarchs. So what do? You get rid of God, therefore you can get rid of the monarch. And so you'll find the French Revolution really brought about a rebirth of this sort of natural philosophy, a naturalistic view of the world, one that removed God, one that borrowed from the old Greek ideas. And that filtered from France into Scotland, and from Scotland down into England. And in particular, one guy called Hume had actually written about Well, we not only do we not have a need for a God, there's, when we're looking at science, when we're looking at this natural philosophy, when we're looking at the nature around us, we have no need to actually discuss God or a deity or anything like that.
Mm.
And William Paley, who was a philosopher, he was an apologist, he was a Christian minister, and he's actually buried at Carlisle Cathedral. He wrote a number of books arguing for the existence of God, evidence from nature, and this was his final work, Paley's Natural Theology. Let me just read out the first chapter for you, called The State of an Argument. In crossing a heath, he says, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that for anything I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever. Nor would it perhaps be very easy to show the absurdity of this answer. But suppose I had found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be at that place. I should hardly think of the answer which I had before given, that for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Yet why should not this answer serve for the watch as well as for the stone? Why is it not as admissible in the second case as in the first? For this reason and no other, that when we come to expect the watch, we perceive, which we could not discover in the stone, that its several parts are framed, put together for a purpose, e.g. that they are so formed and adjusted as to produce motion, and that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day, that if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, or of a different size from what they are, or placed in any other manner, or in any other order than in which they are placed, either no motion at all would have been carried in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. In other words, his point is very simple. If you want to look for evidence of design, you need to look for evidence of properties that do not come from the material that it's made up of. A stone is just lying there on the ground. You could argue that it's always existed. And he even said, hey, that's an absurd answer, but you might struggle to actually prove or disprove it, because it's just a stone. It's just lying there. It's been naturally formed. But if you find a watch, the watch has properties that are, well, it tells the time. But why does it tell the time? Well, Paley then goes in for the rest of the chapter and beyond to discuss in great detail how that watch tells the time. And he makes the very important point. Not only is the watch designed, but every single constituent part of the watch has to be designed for a specific purpose. And it all has to come together as one. Otherwise, you'll never, ever get a working watch. The very fact that that watch has properties that require a intelligent designer means that it is not only a design, it means that you can argue that somebody who existed before it, somebody who was not part of it, and somebody who was not controlled by it actually made all these different parts do what they have to do. Otherwise, you get a non-functioning watch. Now, bearing in mind, this was published back in it was about 1809, I think it was, early 1800s. This edition is from the 1830s. This is pre-Darwin. It was made in the response to skeptics. And John, does the argument that Paley made still stand up today?
Okay, a bit of history. Being a Scotsman myself, I always enjoy walking down one of the main streets in Edinburgh near the university, and Hume's sitting out there as a statue, and many of the students love to get, those big cones they use for roadworks and push it down on his head, so he is becoming the key dunce. If we needed him removed, I wouldn't object one bit whatsoever, because he's the guy who tried to get rid of God out of the system in philosophy and science first. And Paley's response to him utterly annihilates everything he's done. But they've come in through the back door now, and what you find is we now have a situation where the science teachers say you've got to get rid of God. It's not part of science. And the inevitable result are proof the Bible is true. Romans chapter 1 says God has stamped his nature on creation, but it then continues. So read the whole chapter, and it says people who reject God out of their knowledge, God himself hands them over to foolishness. And where we are now in the rejection of design shows in this way. Okay, I have here there he is, one trilobite, right? Now, we know a lot about trilobites. I've got probably 4,000 of these in my collection of this one sort, right? And I've got hundreds of others. Now there's a trilobite, and Darwin and co says this evolved all by itself. The particles came together by chance over vast amounts of time. Now let me show you yet another trilobite. Okay, let's see if we can get that up here. There we are, a bit closer. Look at that, incredible. Now the interesting thing, of course, is I use this second one to give to students. That's a better picture. And the reason I do so is it's actually a hollow brass copy. They can drop this and they won't break it. There's no doubt about it. This one was intelligently designed. And we live in a world where the ultimate contradiction occurred is you're saying this one, which still has its guts and everything inside it, which could walk around, happened by chance. Whereas this one, which is made of bronze, shows all the evidence of intelligent design. That's how stupid you become when you leave God out of your knowledge. And that's where much of science is. And as I said, one of the best evidences, as we begin to sort of round up our program and throw it open to more questions, is the fact that we are looking at scientists increasingly fudging their papers because truth no longer matters. If you leave God out of science, then you've left truth out of science. If you left truth out of science, don't be surprised, we'll get politicization of data. It won't matter what the vaccine does. It won't matter what the drug does. It won't matter what the evidence of the symptoms are. It won't matter what the politicians do with their funding about truth or lies, because truth no longer matters when God no longer matters in the classroom or in politics or in science laboratories at all. So that's the significance of it, Joseph. So let's encourage you out there. Don't run away from, say, design means a designer. Please don't limit your scientific design to saying, well, it proves it was intelligently designed. Great. Which intelligence? Always be honest. The intelligence is Jesus Christ, a triune member of the Godhead that gave rise to Michael Faraday coming up with the three-part electromagnetic theorem, which works. James Clerk Maxwell, and you'll find that science works on having a knowledge of absolute truth from the one who is absolute truth. Joseph, back to you.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks, John. And I think this is, I've read Paley's book as a modern translation copy, but it was spectacular to get one that was very close to his, basically time of writing, and it's got commentary and everything. It's absolutely stunning. So that'll be a wonderful addition to the museum collection and everything else. So praise the Lord for that, and thank you for your support. So it means we can actually purchase these research books and study and go through it all and have time to study them and bring this kind of content through to you. So it does take a lot of time running through these books and media and everything else like that. So hopefully that's been encouraging. Hopefully that's been useful to you all. Let's have some questions, Sam, as we begin to wrap this evening up. What have we got for
I'll have a look.
I did see another super chat pop through as well.
I know. I was just about to pop that up.
Great stuff.
This has come from Brother Timothy. Super chat for $10. Howdy all. God bless Creation Conversations team. God bless you, mate. Thank you so much. Very, very kind of you. I'm just having a look back now for any questions. I can't seem to.
There is one at the top that I can see about, did you say something about light having triune attributes? I can just quickly deal with that because I'm going to have to go and deal with my ill wife that all of you are starting to pray for her. So I'm going to have to go and deal with that. But one of the things that I remember learning in year 10 at high school was if you want to understand light, you have to learn to do this, right? And this was a sort of a simple way to remember the tripart nature of light or the electromagnetic theorem. So you look at that and your thumb was one direction, your finger was at right angles, and your other finger was at right angles. One was the electric field, one was the magnetic field, and the third one was the tripartite interaction of the two. So what you find is this was a simple mechanism used to demonstrate the wave nature, the interactive energy nature of light. And it comes from Michael Faraday's, or James Clerk Maxwell rather, who was the disciple of Michael Faraday. It comes from his acceptance of God creating light, stamping his nature on it. And he already knew things like there were three basic states of matter. There were three basic colors, primary colors associated with light. There were threes everywhere, not just threes, but 3 and 1. So if you took the 3 primary colors and you put them on a wheel and spun them, then they go white. The teacher showed us. Oh, we used to love to spin this wheel and make the thing go white. So the basic primary colors, the 3, would become 1. If you had water and you had steam and you had ice, which we all knew were parts of the states of water, then when you actually got to university and we did an experiment, I still remember being so impressed. You took a test tube, you put water in it, you extracted all of the actual air out of it, so there was only water in it. Then you dropped it into a freezer, and at a set point of pressure and temperature, everything became, well, what did you see in the tube? You saw ice, you saw water, and you saw steam. All 3 were there at once, and we were thereby informed this is simply called the triple point. And all substances that have this uniform nature actually reflect this. Wow, the whole of nature has a 3-part structure, and it goes back to James Clerk Maxwell and his literal insistence on Romans 1 being true, because God's word is true, and he tells us to test things, and it works. So great stuff. I'll bid you farewell. Got to go and play Mr. Nurse now. So my darling wife, and I'll see you, God willing, next week.
I think it's about time that we say goodbye anyway, because we've reached the 2 hours mark. So
right.
I think we should probably wrap that up now anyway. Any other questions that have come through, we will obviously deal with them at the Q&A session, which will be coming up shortly. But let's finish it all here so we can all say goodbye together. I think that's the best idea. We'll be back next week. We'll have some proper scheduling going on rather than leaving it so last minute. I am determined to make sure that we do that. So we will get some good scheduling up, and so you'll be able to see in advance what kind of topics we're dealing with and what we're going. Also, before we go, I just want to mention this because we forgot to do it earlier. We will be doing next week, excuse me, we will be starting our brand new idea of having a news show for creation research, which will feature Dr. Diane Eager here as the sort of the person who's in charge of all of the creation evidence news. So we're going to be doing a nice little feature with me and Diane where we discuss, similar to how we did before, but a bit more sort of formal, discuss some of the content in the evidence news, discuss some of the research that we've done, discuss some of the events and some of the news from creation research as well. So it should be really good. I'm looking forward to doing that, and hopefully that'll all be ready to go out fairly shortly. Make sure you get onto the evidence newsletter subscription list, which comes out for free. And our little news item will be going out on YouTube and Facebook as well. Yeah, I've got a busy week ahead of me catching everything up. So pray for me and pray for the technology support if you can. We've got to try and sort that out this week, hopefully, if I'm back, and then I'm out on travels again. So pray much. John, for prayer, we can pray for you. We can pray for the ministry and for your wife. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Her name is Anne, if I forgot to mention it.
Name is Anne. Yes, we pray for Anne for sure. So thank you all very much, everybody. God bless. It's been great. Watch for the news about both the news feature and for the retreat that's coming up. We've got a lot of great stuff going. But catch you later. Any last words from any of you guys?
Nope.
Yes,
over and out.
for watching. Come back again.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the donations.
Catch you later. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. All right. God bless.